Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me again. This is so great, the Artist Series at a Distance for the Sessions panel. We have all these guests that come on, and today I've got with me Alan Friedman. Alan, you have such an interesting story with the balance of great quality music and great business. So welcome, Alan. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here. Always fun with you. Always.
What's fun about the music industry is that I get to meet all these incredible characters that have life stories that are so interesting. And Alan, you're right up there with everybody. And I want to get into when you started and what inspired you. I think it was February 9th, 1964.
The day went down in infamy. Yes, true. Yeah.
And that's got you involved in music, but then how you got involved into the business side, which we'll get to in a moment. So talk about first that entrance of you getting involved in just being sucked into the music industry.
That moment, and it's weird. I'm 65 years of age, so we're going back basically 57 years ago, if my math is correct. Reminds me of the joke, 67% of all accountants are really good in math, and the other half, not so much. I don't know if you stupid, bad accountant joke. Anyway, so, every Sunday, my parents used to go up to my grandparents' house for a Sunday, brunch or dinner. And it was just routine. We'd watch the Ed Sullivan Show and Topo Gigio. And I just, I remember like it was yesterday. I didn't even know the Beatles were going to be on. I didn't even know who the Beatles were. And so we were just watching the Ed Sullivan Show, and he announces, tonight on our show, we have the Beatles. The place went wild, and it was instantaneous. It was like, I remember like just sitting there glued to the TV going, I want to do that. I want to, it was the coolest thing. I mean, it was a cultural shift, basically. And I became enthralled with their music. And then all music that came out from that point forward. And then it wasn't, I remember for a year or two, like, especially I remember going to my third or fourth grade elementary Halloween party, and I went dressed up as Paul McCartney. And my mom made me like a little cutout guitar and put strings on it, but it wasn't a real guitar. But I knew even then I wanted to learn how to play guitar. And so like within a year or two, they bought me some stupid, cheap guitar where the strings were that far off the neck and, off the fretboard, and I struggled with that. But then when I was 12 years old, I got a real acoustic guitar. There's a very funny guitar story. I'll make it short. So when I was 12, I had a friend of mine who were really good guitar player. His name was Dean Chilakis. And this kid at 12 years of age was, playing rock, jazz at 12 years of age. And then, and he had, I remember he had a Gibson ES330. And so when I'd come, we were best of friends. I'd go over, he'd let me play his guitar. He'd show me things. And then I saved up enough money. I was scrubbing a luncheonette counter at the local pharmacy that had a luncheonette for $20 a week, and saved enough money to buy a guitar. And I saved up like a couple $100, and all I wanted was a Gibson SG, because Pete Townsend was using a Gibson SG. My parents said, how much was it? It was $240. They said, no, that's too much money. We're not going to let you buy a guitar that much. I saved up the money. Why couldn't I spend my own money? I wound up buying a pre-CBS Fender Telecaster for $150 and traded it in for one of the first of many stupid things I did 2 years later, and got myself a Strat. So at 14, I had a white Jimi Hendrix Strat, and I started playing in bands, and that's how it all started. So that's still my younger years.
But, in your younger years, you mentioned people like Pete Townsend and Jimi Hendrix and, of course, the Beatles. There was such great music at that time to pull us into the magic and the passion of the music. Yeah. So what was it about the Beatles that they hit that just mesmerized you to want to get you involved with playing music?
I'd never heard music like that. I mean, it's funny. My parents... There truly was then, I don't know if you'd agree, Dom, but back then, unlike now, there was a generation gap of music. My parents were listening to, Fly Me to the Moon and Moon River and anything that had moon in the title, and Sinatra. So to me, it was either that old fuddy-duddy music, which I never really captured my ear or my soul, if you will. So as soon as the Beatles hit, it was exciting. It was, they were okay, four mop top guys, but it was like, we called it rock and roll back then. And it was just a sound we had never heard before. And looking back on that music now, as an adult listening with adult ears to that music is not only timeless, there was far more that went into those songs than I ever gave it credit for. Their sense of melody, their sense of chord structure, their production, which obviously George Martin had a lot to do with that. It was amazing, the time and effort that I look now, looking back on that music. And much of the music that you're alluding to that we had listening to, whether it was, rock, the British Invasion, from Zeppelin or Jethro Tull or Deep Purple and those bands, to American music, and we had Grand Funk, and then the whole Canyon music of Carole King and Joni Mitchell and Crosby, Stills and Nash. All that music was not only fresh and new, but there was a lot of time and effort and thought, I think, that went into that, and far greater than I gave it credit for back then when I was a kid.
Well, this is the magic about what you do, because you've been able to balance performing and actively continuing performing. I think you said you have your sixth album that you're working on now?
Yes. It could be a double record, because it's probably going to be, I don't want to say it's my last, but I have so many friends and now some famous, well-known musicians as clients, and I've somehow been able to get them to play on the records without compensating. All I have to do is threaten them with an IRS audit, and it's amazing how they play on the record. So, like, recently, a band, I'll tell you, I'll name drop a little bit. One of my heroes for the longest time just became a client of mine. The band is called The Immediate Family, and you might know who they are. It's Lee Sklar, Danny Korchmar, Waddy Wachtel, and Russ Kunkel. And then there's a fifth guy, Steve Postel, who's a really talented singer-songwriter, guitar player, who he had been a client of mine for a long time. And I'd known each of the guys individually. I'd met them a few times. And Lee was playing with Toto at one point. And of course, I knew them all, not personally, but just on the records that they played on, from Carole King, James Taylor, Jackson Browne. Then the band became a client, and now a couple of them have become personal clients. So it's funny how I'm getting all these clients, these heroes of mine, in their late stage of life. It's just kind of funny. But, I don't care when it comes, it's coming. So it's all good.
Your life really, and I say this seriously, should be studied, Alan, because you really are an excellent musician. And even though you have great humility and you always kind of like tease yourself and like to just kind of knock down what you're doing, which I think is absolutely wonderful. And I try and do that also. But I tell you something, you play your tail off.
Thank you.
It really is fantastic. And we haven't even tapped upon the business side of what it is running an accounting firm. That's a whole nother intensity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're making this work.
My parents, God bless them, reminds me of a funny joke. What do you call a Jewish boy who can't stand the sight of blood? An accountant. So somehow they had it in their head that, and they saw that I was playing all the time, and they were very supportive of it. But they wanted me to go to college and find a real job. Like as if, being a musician wasn't a real job. And so my father was a CPA, had a small practice. I worked for him over a few summers. I actually liked it. Pretty early on, I decided, I want to pursue accounting for the music industry. And I'd been attending the NAMM trade shows since 1985. And in the early 90s, I got introduced to the people who ran NAMM. And they didn't understand why I was at the show, because I wasn't a retailer, I wasn't a manufacturer, I wasn't, a sponsoring musician of any gear or anything. So I explained, well, we have an accounting firm that, is in the music industry. We had some local musicians, a couple local product manufacturers, and a couple large local music stores. And so the gal who was running NAMM membership at the time, her name was Janet Thompson, said, would you be interested in speaking to our membership, on some financial topics? Because the music industry, especially retailers, they're very, as you would imagine, they're all musicians who wanted to be in music and earn a living at music. And they decided, well, selling musical products would be a great way to make a living. And they're very front end oriented, meaning they're all about the product knowledge, marketing. The back end stuff like accounting, financial statements, banking, all that stuff, they don't care about that. So sometimes it shows in their business. So I started speaking to music retailers in the early 90s, and that's when the doors blew open for our firm, and we sort of became, people refer to us as NAMM's accountants and stuff, but we do all the financial education for NAMM. It's funny, all our musicians and studios and bands and Pro Tools engineers and things like that, they all came, but they came as a byproduct of retailers. Yeah. So it started off really that we were doing more so for the stores selling musical product and some of the manufacturers making musical product, guitars, amps, boutique amp companies, drum companies. But then the musicians who were at the show and who we became acquainted with all followed, and musicians will refer other musicians, and that's how it all started. So it really all started with NAMM in a funny way. You know, it's one thing, especially when you're a retailer trying to identify what product your customers are going to want, and guitars, amps, keyboards, all those things. But you know, it's like to be there physically and to meet with the manufacturer as a retailer, to meet with your manufacturers, to talk about new product that's coming out, find out what what quantities of product that you can get, what your payment terms are, and all those things. It's way better to do that face-to-face and in a meeting setting rather than on the phone or to wait for your reps to show up, those kinds of things. So the NAMM show holds a lot of importance. But, you know, as much as we make fun of it for all the social nuttiness that goes on, there's a lot of loud music. There's, a lot of live shows and partying and everything else. It probably, I think most companies, owners of companies or people in this industry would probably tell you that more exciting business opportunities happen at the NAMM show than other times of the year. So it's an important show. It really is.
It's the ultimate of, we talk about social media, which is relationship cultivation.
Yes.
So was way before there was social media. It was relationship cultivation. Everyone gets together, talks, hangs out, communicate, and you find the common denominators that we all need to have, and that's how relationships are developed.
Right, exactly. I can't tell you like how many, I'll give you a great little story. It's a fun story. So I was there in 1995 speaking, may have even been my first speaking engagement at Anaheim, because it had been 10 years that I was attending before I actually spoke. And my wife, Beth, was with me. And we're walking through the hallway, one of the halls, and I said, "Oh, there's Doug Wimbish, who's from Hartford, Connecticut." Doug, for anybody who knows, he is the bass player for Living Colour, the band Living Colour, but he's been on so many recordings of other artists, Paula Cole, there's Rolling Stones, just like a whole slew of different people. And so I was excited to see him. I saw him from a distance, and Beth, my wife, says, "Well, go up and say hi." I had met him once before, and I said, "No." She goes, "Go ahead." So I went up to him. I didn't know what kind of reception I was going to get. And I said, "Hey, Doug, my name's Alan Friedman. I'm from, Hartford, Connecticut, which is where he lives." And he sort of remembered we met at a music store a few years earlier called LaSalle Music. And he said, "What are you doing at the show?" I said, "Well, I'm an accountant." I said, "We have a CPA firm back in Connecticut." He goes, "I haven't filed my returns in the last couple of years. I actually need a new accountant. Would you take me on?" I said, "Yes." So Doug not only became a client, became one of my closest friends. From Doug, I got Will Calhoun and the band Living Colour, who turned me on to Bernard Fowler, the background vocalist for the Rolling Stones, who turned me on to half their production team, in the Stones. It just morphed one into another. And that's how our client base grew. Another crazy story is Bob Bradshaw. I don't know if you know that name. Bob builds all the guitar racks and pedal board effects and everything. He's been doing it for years, for guys like Peter Frampton, Steve Lukather, Mike Landau. It's a who's who, Eddie Van Halen, who's list. So I met him through Steve Lukather, and I wanted a pedal board built, and I called him up. I ordered one. We started talking, and he found out I was an accountant in the industry. He became a client. From Bob, I got Joey Brasler was a vice president of Fender. The Steakhouse recording studio in L.A. The list is endless, and those two people just sort of morphed into like hundreds of musician clients, and so
Well, that's also the trust that the music industry has with each other. When they recommend somebody, they know there's a in that they have, and there's a certain level of respect and trust, which I think you have earned absolutely fantastically.
It's sweet of you to say that.
Really, no, I'm serious. But go back and just talk about. I want to go back and talk about the similarities that accounting has with music.
Yeah. So
talk about that.
When you think, first of all, when you think about drumming, it's all math.
It's all math.
And there's a common skill set. Accounting is math, and I will tell you that NAMM has done extensive research on this, that there is absolutely a correlation between math and science and music ability, playing music. They're all intertwined, a lot of these math-based professions in playing music. I mean, if you just think, music is a language. When we learned how to play music, it was, typically either you take lessons from someone or you tried learning on your own. Both my kids did take lessons for a period of time, but they had YouTube, growing up. And my son, I'm very proud of, especially both my sons play, and they're really good. My youngest one, Todd, who was at the session that you had done, he's 26 years old. And I sound like the proud father. He's become one of my favorite drummers. He's playing on a lot of the tracks on the last record and on this one. And his favorite drummers are Jeff Porcaro, Clyde Stubblefield from James Brown Band, Gavin Harrison, Simon Phillips, Todd Zuckerman. All the guys that we listen to, Cobham, Weckl, just like he's a student. They're turning us onto music all the time, and it's good music because I've taught them. I've taught them what good music is. There's like no gap. We're listening to the same stuff, playing the same stuff. It's crazy. It's crazy.
And what's amazing about it is that we have the same tools that we can go back, like you said, YouTube, and even with the sessions panel.
Yes.
Most musicians you mentioned, Danny Korchmeyer-Cooch, I've interviewed him, Leland Sklar, Dave Weckl, Vinny Colaiuta, Steve Gadd, Clyde Stubblefield and Jabbo Starks I interviewed was the last interview that I interviewed together with them. So our generation has put this together so this younger generation can have access to what we grew up with and the inspiration that these people had. So this is a very powerful, time to live in.
Dom, you've succeeded. You really, if ever there was a measurement of success, you guys have absolutely done it with these sessions. And it's really important that we capture this knowledge base and this element of time. I don't want to say that this, we'll never see this again. I've said that. I admit I've said that when I refer to the richness of the music from the 60s, 70s, 80s, even to the 90s. But it's so important to expose them to the music and the lessons that we have learned in these generations of music and musicians. And you have captured that. NAMM's doing that with oral history. And so this is really so important. You can make a career in music. I've got hundreds of clients who have done it successfully. You just have to, there's some basics that you just have to apply to make sure that your financial house is in order, that you don't do silly things where you're giving publishing away and things of that nature. And just
let's talk about those lessons, because those lessons are important. So, for someone who's writing, they have to understand to start their own publishing company and have ownership in that. So, talk about some of the things that you advise your clients to protect themselves so they can have themselves fundamentally set financially to continue.
Got it. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit I'll talk about that point, but I'll talk a little bit more starting off on a global level, because the one thing that all musicians have in common is that they're all trying to have a vocation in music and make a living at it. Not everyone is writing music. Some are performing in symphonies, some are teaching, some are owning music stores. And so there's a variety of different vocations in music. It's really important that you, whatever vocation or career path that you take, it's important that you have at least a basic understanding of the financial aspects of earning a living. That doesn't even have to apply to just being in music. That's true for everyone.
Yeah.
But when you're a musician, there's more of an occurrence of yes, many times you'll be paid as an employee. Sometimes you'll be paid as an independent contractor. That holds, that's very common in music, unlike other industries. If you work for an accounting firm, I can almost guarantee you, you're going to be paid as an employee because you're working for a firm. When you're a musician and you're doing recording dates, or you're doing live gigs, or you're teaching, more times than not, you're going to be paid as an independent contractor, meaning these are one-off gigs. They may reoccur. If you're teaching, you may have lessons that you're teaching every week or every other week, or you may, if you're playing in a wedding band, you may have gigs, but sometimes they're with different musicians, different band configurations. So you're more often than not, you're going to be paid as an independent contractor. What that means is that you're going to be paid money without taxes being withheld. And when you're not making a lot of money, it's so easy to just take all the money that you're making and use it for living expenses, food and rent, mortgages, whatever, and not save some of it for taxes. So at the end of the year, we all have to file a tax return. You don't want to not file a return. You know, it's funny. Believe it or not paying your tax that you owe won't land you in jail. It'll just put you behind the eight ball financially, and you'll have to work out a payment arrangement with the Internal Revenue Service or the state tax authority that you owe money to. But that won't wind you in jail. Not filing a return and not declaring income, you can potentially wind up with criminal action, because then they can prove, if you've done it year after year, that there's an intent to defraud the government. They don't like that. So file your return. I tell all our clients, look, if you owe money, especially after coming off of COVID, like there are so many of our clients that, you know, they may have had some income, but it wasn't enough to live on. So they needed every penny they made. And some of it came from unemployment benefits, which for the most part are taxable. There's a small portion that is now not taxable, at least for 2020. That came late in the game. It's a whole other story. But it's all taxable income. So you may not have made a lot of money, but you're going to owe tax on that income no matter what. So what do? Okay, so as a musician earning independent 1099 income, independent contractor income, your business expenses become really, really important, very powerful, because if, let's say, I'll pick a number, let's say during the year you earned $50,000 in lessons and gigging and recording. Okay, so you have $50,000 of income. If you don't record any business expenses, which you very well may have had, you probably did have, you're going to pay federal income tax on that $50,000. Let's just say, you know, it's at 15%, just to pick a number. So that's, if my math is correct, that's $7,500 just in federal tax. You have state tax that's due. So let's say you're in a state that your state tax is 5%. So that's another $2,500. Now you're up to $10,000 in tax. Right. Oh yeah, you have Social Security and Medicare tax. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when you work for someone, when you're employed and get a W-2, you have all those taxes withheld. So you don't have the opportunity to spend them. And you also have Social Security and Medicare withheld. So you don't have the opportunity to spend that. And that's at the rate of 7.65%. What you may or may not know is that your employer is also paying a matched Social Security and Medicare tax. So the government's getting 15.3% Social Security and Medicare tax. When you're self-employed, you have the pleasure of paying both sides, because you're the employer and the employee. So now when you figure another approximate 15% on top of the other 15% of federal and 5% state, I mean, you know, you're at 35%. You just lost, you know, over a third of that $50,000. Call it $16,000, $17,000, $18,000 in tax money, which means you would have had to save that and live on only 32,000 of the 50, which no musician ever does. So no self-employed person. So the only way you can mitigate that taxation is by taking business expenses. Here's a few that people forget. Like if you spend any money on iTunes and buying music media to learn songs, the IRS rules are any expense incurred and the production of income is a legitimate expense. If you incurred an internet cost, cost of your computer, cost of mileage, in driving to gigs. If you have a website, that's advertising. If you paid someone, a professional, to prepare your tax return, that's a professional fee. Legal fees. I mean, Paul Quinn spoke about the importance of having an attorney, especially when it comes to looking at contracts that does involve writing music and publishing music. The attorney is probably, frankly, more important than your accountant, because all we have to do is just account for the royalty income that's going to get reported on Form 1099. Really, you want to be protected from a legal standpoint. And so that's why I left that to last, that the publishing, the writing side, mechanical royalties, and all those things are important. But it's really important to have a good lawyer, music entertainment lawyer on your team. But those other businesses, so to round this all, to sort of summarize, if you made $50,000, but you had $15,000 or $20,000 in other legitimate expenses, now you're only paying tax on $30,000, not $50,000. Our judicial system is based upon you're innocent until proven guilty. Our tax system is exactly the opposite. You're entitled to nothing unless you can prove that you had a business expense. And if you get money, it's all taxable unless you prove it wasn't. So the IRS is not a fun part of our government to deal with.
And that's why having a professional like yourself is so important to have, so they can protect themselves and not get caught, because the horror stories of musicians that have been in debt and in challenge, who have been disabled to perform and play because they are in this, this negative, is so sad to have experienced.
One of our early clients was a really well-known musician and a very well-known, internationally known band. And with his accountant was the same accounting firm for a period of time that the band was using, but then the band left and got a bigger firm. And he stayed with this other firm, this other large firm, and they were in New York City. And the accountants were handling all his money. All the money was coming into their client's funds account. And then anytime he wanted money, he had to call his accountant to get money paid, to him. It was not a great situation. He wound up leaving that accountant, became a client of our firm. He was highly recommended to us. Come to find out, the accountants hadn't even filed his tax returns for the last 4 years. And when we asked, why weren't you had all the financial information, why didn't you file? Well, the client was on tour, couldn't get hold of him, so we just sort of waited till he was ready to file. This guy was getting demand notices for taxes from the state in which he lived in. It was all kinds of penalties and everything. And two things happened, good things. So when he came over, we got all the back returns filed and everything. And believe it or not, different than many other business managers, I don't like, unless there's a really strong reason to do it, I don't like handling our clients' money. I love accounting for their money, but I feel that it's their money, it should be in their possession. And so there are times when bands are on tour and the monies do come into our client's funds account. But the minute it comes in, we pay what bills are there, and immediately it gets shuffled out of our client's account into a band account that they control. And that's something I feel strongly about. It's a little different than some other firms do. Other firms like handling the client's money. To me, it's a license to steal. But I'm not saying they are.
It does get ugly, and there are so many ugly stories that are out there. I mean, musicians to control their finances is very, very important.
Very important. Very important. And it's good to get a firm that thinks the same way.
Absolutely. And which is what you do, which is why your integrity in the industry is so high, Alan, because people, when your name is mentioned, listen, trust is the number one game, that if someone has trust in you, that's everything.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dom. And thank you very much for their very sweet things. And I frankly think it's because I'm a musician as well. And I understand that this money is hard earned. It doesn't come easy. There's other occupations that seem to be easier to make a living at. But musicians they're passionate about what they do and their creativity and everything, and they should be paid. It angers me to no end, like some people just think music is free, when there's a lot of time and effort that goes into, making that music, and they should be paid for it.
I want you to talk about your bands now. You've got you're keeping these bands going, you're playing, the business side is doing its thing, but you still find the time and you make the time to get behind your instrument, write, compose, record, get together and rehearse. How do you balance all of this?
So one of the earlier bands that started like 25 years ago, I was asked to play with our keyboard player. His name is Mark Zampino. He just retired. He was the director of public affairs for the Connecticut Society of CPAs. He was a keyboard player. And he said, it'd be really cool. There's a career day in accounting. We get all the college-bound high school students to this, I think it was at UConn, University of Connecticut, UConn campus. And they have a full day of why accounting is awesome. And we start off the day, they do it every year, where what started was just getting a few guys who were CPAs to get together and play a couple tunes. Well, we started a band, and it became the Accounting Crows. Initially, it was like Lead Pencil, and then it was, I forget, they had a couple crazy names, but then we settled on the Accounting Crows. It seemed like a fun name. And it's all covers. We're doing, doing Beatles tunes, some Monkees, Grand Funk, just all classic rock stuff. And then we started doing that. And then that morphed into, we played every April 15th at this local bar where all the accountants hung out at the end of tax season. And so that's one of the fun local bands that I play in. And then about 15 years ago, I was speaking at the RPMDA, Retail Print Music Dealers Association. This is all people from Hal Leonard, Alfred Publishing, Carl Fisher, and a lot of these guys, the guys in that, so there was a talent show. We all got together and did this band thing. That turned into a band. The band's called Prince because we were all from the print industry. It's PRINTZ, all classic rock. We played every winter NAMM show. Chris Scialfa's our lead singer. I think he's the national sales manager of all products for D'Addario. Joel Menchie's the other guitar player. He's our future chairman of NAMM. He's going to be chairman this coming year. Zach Phillips, who's the director of professional development for NAMM. Steve Harder is our bass player, who works for Harman. And our drummer is David Yankee, who's the national VP at Hal Leonard. Just another fun band. And then the last band that I got in was just sort of a special recording project. As I said, I've recorded with a lot of great musicians. And so I got together with Jonathan Mover, who's now the editor of Drumhead magazine. Vince DiColo is a great keyboard player in LA. He did the Rocky IV soundtrack, Transformers. He's done a lot of different film stuff. My friend Robbie LeBlanc was a killer singer. Yeah. He's on most of my records. He's also a national wine rep for Bogle Vineyards. And Doug Wimbish played bass. So we had a bass player, singer, keyboard, drummer, and I play guitar. We went into a studio for 3 days in LA, just on the spot, wrote 10 tunes and recorded a record. And that's the kind of fun that I have. And here's the funniest story of them all. Look, all the gear geeks out there will appreciate this. As we get older, we become creatures of habit. For 15 years, I've been recording on a Mackie 24 board through a couple Alesis HD24. It's an old, but it was digital box. I didn't want to learn Pro Tools. I didn't have the time. It's for younger people. I wanted to turn on the system, hit play and record. So last summer, a part of my ADAT broke and I couldn't get the part replaced because it's old technology. So I finally broke down and I got Pro Tools. I bought a really nice 16 IO Lynx converter. And I sat down. What else do you do during a pandemic? I sat down and I taught myself Pro Tools, which now makes me ask the rhetorical question, why didn't I do this 20 years ago?
Amazing, right?
It's Pro Tools is awesome. So that's all I've been doing. I love Pro Tools. And if I spend money, it's all on plugins.
It seems like during this pandemic, you really used the time well, man. It seems like you really kind of utilized the fact that we were in lockdown and you made the most out of it. You kept your passion and your heart in music, and you made it work to your favor.
It did. It did. I mean, I'll tell you something, Dom. I mean, I don't know what you're hearing, but when you talk to people in the industry, while all our musicians, we're not touring, mostly not recording, but many of them found other ways, online lessons. We have the technology now to send files and get drums recorded and send them back. And I used to say, well, gee, it's not as much fun as being there. But now with Skype, you kind of can be there. It's, it's not physically, but the technology works. And, companies in the industry, especially on the manufacturing side, will say 2020 was probably one of their best years ever. We're all hunkered down at home. What do? You go start podcasts. You're buying condenser microphones, little mixing boards, headphones. And all that stuff, a lot of companies did really well in COVID.
But again, the musician has to be willing to embrace the change and to adapt.
Yes.
Part of it. I did very well.
So.
I am busier than ever by teaching on Zoom. I'm recording on my drums here, which I've got they're all mic'd up through my video and audio interface here that I have. I've got 4 cameras. I'm teaching, I'm recording, I'm doing master classes, I'm doing clinics. And I'm not traveling. I'm in the studio in my backyard. It works. Alan, it's always a pleasure to have some time with you. It is absolutely great. I think what you have given the advice and just the inspiration to people is for them to listen to and reevaluate how they organize their lives in their financial area and how they organize their lives in still following their passion. You do that so well.
Thank you so much, Dom. I really appreciate, I think it's really important for people to, just like you said, get their financial house in order, control your money, get some good professionals on your team. You do that, you'll be fine. You'll be good. So.
And then when you're living your passion, you live it with 100% joy.
Exactly. You can buy a lot of expensive plugins for your.
Alan, thank you so much. Stay well. The Artist Series.
Thank you for having me. Please promise me that we'll grab lunch or dinner or something at Summer NAMM.
We sure will, man. You're on for sure, man. Thank you so much as always.
Okay. Good to see you.
Dom Famularo here, the Sessions panel. This is so exciting. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Click the subscribe button to be a part of what we're doing. The views help us tremendously. All of your comments, we read them and react to them. This is incredible. The support you're giving us is great. The Sessions panel. We'll see you real soon.